Welcome to Impact Makers Radio, featuring industry thought leaders sharing problem-solving insights to help grow your business and live the life you love. And here's your host, Stuart Andrew Alexander.
Hi, and welcome to another Let's Talk Divorce conversation. And during this segment of the show, I have licensed attorney and qualified neutral through the Minnesota Supreme Court, Alex Scott Glassmann of the Erickson Mediation Institute, all the way from Minneapolis, Minnesota. Now, Alex, who has a wealth of experience in the area of family law and mediation, is here today to talk to you about a very interesting topic. You see, Alex has taken the time out of his busy day to come and speak to us about why you should consider mediation. So, if you are one of the many people considering divorce in the Minneapolis, Minnesota area, then you might want to just stop what you're doing, take a break, grab yourself a notepad and pen even, and get ready to take some notes as we listen in to what Alex has to share with us today. So, with that said, he's a very busy man. Let's not keep him waiting any longer. Welcome to the show, Alex.
Thank you very much, Stuart. It's a pleasure to be here.
You are so welcome. We are so happy to have you on the show. We know how busy you are, so let's just jump feet first in then, Alex. Briefly, in your own words, of course, describe the kinds of people who you serve and the various types of situations they find themselves in when they come to you for your help.
Of course. It's a very wide spectrum, actually. I see people who range from very cooperative and relatively amicable to those who are just in the throes of toxic, high conflict, and kind of everything in between. I see people primarily who are in the midst of considering how to settle their divorce. They've made the decision to divorce and they're trying to settle all of those terms and all of those logistics. But I also see people who have already been divorced and they come into my office to settle some sort of change in child support or the parenting schedule. I also have people who aren't sure yet about whether or not they should divorce, and I can either guide them towards reconciliation or help them set up a temporary settlement agreement that allows for sort of a temporary separation while they test the waters.
Okay then, Alex, with that said, now that we know who you help, it's a wide array of people, it must be said that before we continue, anything that you share from this point on is not legal advice or legal assistance. It's purely for the purpose of disseminating information. Can we both agree on that today, Alex?
Absolutely. I'm glad you said that. It's absolutely correct.
Fantastic. So, with that said then, Alex, when you think about those people who are listening right now and they're considering divorce, what's the most common misconception that you come across while you're out there helping those people?
I think the most common misconception is that you have to be cooperative. I think people think that in mediation, we just all hold hands and sing Kumbaya. And I really want to correct that notion. It's not a pie in the sky, hippy dippy sort of thing. It's really getting down to brass tacks. We deal with a lot of perfunctory, kind of mundane topics like taking stock of the marital estate and establishing budgets and all of that. And like I said at the beginning, I see a wide range of people. And while, of course, some of my clients are very cooperative, some are about as high conflict as you can imagine. I've had experience with people who are even dealing with physical abuse, about as extreme as you can imagine. And mediation is still a very, very good tool for those who can't agree on anything and who have zero trust. In fact, sometimes mediation can be, I think, most dramatically effective for those people.
So with that said then, Alex, and obviously keeping your client's confidentiality in mind, could you please share an example or even a case study, so to speak, of how you've helped someone or how you would even go about helping somebody who, came to you or comes to you with those challenges, that misconception you just described, and what kind of transformational results you were able to or would be able to gain for them?
Every week, I run a divorce info session, kind of an informal class. It's anonymous, very casual. People come in who are thinking about divorce. They might not know what mediation is. They might not know the ins and outs of divorce law in Minnesota. And after I give them a crash course in mediation, one of the most common sorts of responses I get is, this sounds great, but how do I convince my spouse to go along with this process? In other words, they're sold, that person who's in attendance, but they're really concerned about how to sell the other party on the process and the idea. And what I often find is, this is going to be the first thing that you agree on, this decision to mediate. And the reason it's not going to be a difficult sell, and the reason that this is going to be the one thing you can agree on, even if you can't agree on anything else, is because it's such a cost-effective thing to try. It's such a low-risk option, and you have very little to lose. And when you think about the fact that, on average, I can mediate an entire divorce from beginning to end, including drafting the paperwork to be submitted to the court, for less money than it would cost a single party to retain an attorney. Well, you can see even the most skeptical, cynical, selfish person who has zero trust is going to kind of perk up and think, well, if I can at least give this a shot and save some of the money that I need to get a new house and to start covering the costs of having two separate households. Most people find it difficult enough to make ends meet when they're consolidated and everything's kind of lumped together. Right. I think it's a very potent incentive. And once people discover that, okay, that's not going to be a hard sell, and I think we can at least agree to begin mediation, that's the first agreement of many. And once you start to build that momentum, it's an interesting thing. There aren't always these thunderclap moments in the midst of mediation where you really feel like a miracle has been worked. It's much more of, I think, at the end, looking back at aggregately everything that's happened, and you realize cumulatively over the span of just a few weeks, we've mediated maybe 3 times for 2-hour sessions at a time. So cumulatively, 6 hours, and it's done. And that's the moment, I think, when people realize and understand and appreciate, wow, it wasn't this pie in the sky thing. It wasn't singing Kumbaya, but we got it done. And I had a role in coming up with the terms of my own agreement. I didn't have somebody strong-arming me and telling me what to do and where to go.
Well, thanks for sharing that case study there, Alex. I'm sure our listeners are going to find that very useful. So as a reminder, ladies and gentlemen, my guest today is licensed attorney and qualified neutral through the Minnesota Supreme Court, Alex Scott Glassmann. And today's topic is why you should consider mediation. And Alex has already touched on a few reasons why. Let me ask you this then, Alex. For those people who are out there and considering divorce, they find themselves in that unfortunate position, please share one common but unknown pitfall that they need to avoid. They definitely need to be aware of. They definitely need to avoid regardless of what situation they find themselves in.
Well, I think the most important thing that a lot of people don't know about is to bear in mind that this is hard work. I think a lot of people don't know what mediation is, but once they find out, it sounds so amazing. The positives are so overwhelming. It is definitely far cheaper than litigation. It's definitely a process that generates agreements that people tend to voluntarily upkeep. So you save money, you save time, you feel better about the outcome. But it's important not to naively believe that this is just going to be a cakewalk. It's not easy and it's not automatic. I work by keeping people together in the same room. And that's different from how a lot of other lawyer mediators operate. Many lawyer mediators separate parties into different rooms, and the lawyer mediator will go back and forth. And it's kind of like when you're separated like that, the lawyer mediator is kind of cutting your steak for you, so to speak. He goes into one room and evaluates the strengths and weaknesses of one party. He goes into the other room, he evaluates the strengths and weaknesses of the other, and he kind of puts his thumb down on both parties to try and force them towards the middle and until they kind of relent and eventually compromise. It's very different, my process. By keeping the parties together and forcing them to really interact with each other, I don't have the audacity or the pretense to kind of evaluate the strengths and weaknesses of people's positions. What I'm an expert at is facilitating a really meaningful and, like I say, difficult conversation between the two parties and allowing them to work past impasse. So it's a long-winded way of saying brace yourself for mediation and don't assume that this is just going to be some sort of idyllic, easier, automatic process. It takes diligence to get through.
So in the general public's eye then, Alex, mediation is still quite new, isn't it? It's not something which is really top of mind at the moment. Am I correct in saying that?
Well, I think you're absolutely correct in saying it's not at the top of people's minds. In terms of its novelty, it's interesting. It's been around for a while. In fact, I'm lucky enough to be working at the first mediation firm in the Midwest, I think the third in the country. Back in 1977, Erickson Mediation opened up. And Marilyn McKnight and Steve Erickson were the founders, so they were very forward-thinking, very cutting edge. And so it's been around, and it's been evolving and growing and becoming much more widespread. Now you can find, I think, tens of mediation firms just here in Minnesota alone, hundreds across the country, abroad as well.
So if I am looking for a lawyer mediator, what are some of the signs I need to be aware of, when I'm trying to hire a lawyer mediator like yourself? Well,
first of all, it is not absolutely necessary that you find a lawyer mediator. You can mediate without a law degree, and sometimes that's even preferable depending on what your biggest area of concern is. For instance, Marilyn McKnight, the co-founder of Erickson Mediation, she has a background in social work, and I think she, understandably, is really concerned about the idea of people expecting that you need a law degree to mediate. Sometimes lawyer mediators, especially those who practice that evaluative style, can be more of a hindrance than a help. And sometimes it's helpful to have somebody with a different professional background because they're not going to as automatically stoke those adversarial flames, so to speak.
What's most important to you about being able to help your clients to achieve their desired outcomes?
I think for me, it's all about the satisfaction that comes from witnessing a very potent change. When people first come in to see me, they're visibly racked with anxiety and stress. I mean, you can see it in their body language and how they hold themselves. And they're exhibiting all kinds of symptoms that really aren't, it's not an exaggeration to say, are things that you would normally associate with mental illness. I mean, it's not trivial, and I don't mean this just simply euphemistically. I just attended this past weekend a conference where therapists were saying that in a very real sense, divorce is a temporary mental illness. The trauma and the stress associated with it really wreaks havoc on people in a very acute way during this time.
Sure.
And so to see people when they're kind of at that low point initially, and slowly empower them and give them the tools and the process they need to really take ownership and establish agency in this process, that is really, really fulfilling stuff. And when they're signing on that final day after we've wrapped up the mediation and we've drafted all of the paperwork, they're no longer visibly racked with anxiety. They're sitting up straight, and they're proud, I think, of having gotten through this. And that's a very potent thing.
And how does that make you feel then, Alex?
I'd like to think in a small way that I'm really providing kind of a public service. I know technically we're a for-profit company, but I think provide an outstanding value. And I really think that this is an extension of and jibes with my past experience of doing public service work. And I really think that we're helping people avoid protracted pain that the adversarial system tends to extract upon people going through divorce. And I feel good about that.
Well, Alex, this show or this series is fundamentally for those people out there, what I call the little people with no voice. It's for the children who, in my eyes, I'm a child of divorce myself, and my parents went through a very volatile divorce. There was lots of blood, there was lots of violence, lots of fighting. And I was only 8 years old, and I had to process that myself, and ended up carrying the guilt of my parents' breakup throughout my adulthood, my young adulthood. I thought it was my fault. So one of the reasons why I've created this series and to invite people like yourself, and I just love how you encapsulated what you feel that you're doing. It is a public service. And that's what we're trying to do here with this show, is to create a public service where members of the public who unfortunately find themselves in that position of considering divorce can listen into people like yourself giving great insights, great advice, not legal advice, I must add again, but in the hope that when they're listening, that, and especially if there is a lot of conflict and there are children involved, this is my own personal hope, is that if you are in that position and you're listening to Alex right now, and I'm sure he's going to share his own opinions on this, but if you are a divorcing couple or a couple who are facing divorce, considering divorce, and you have children, as much as you may hate yourselves at this particular moment, you simply have to love your children more than you hate yourselves. And you may have valid reasons, or you hate each other, sorry, and you may have valid reasons for that. You know, you may have been cheated on, whatever the case may be, but the children, they do not have a voice. And it's people like Alex who help those children to have a voice. So, Alex, what do you say to those listeners right now who may find themselves in that position, and they do have family, they do have young children who are involved, they're caught up in the middle, there's a lot of conflict there. What insights would you like to share? Again, not legal advice.
Of course. No, I'm glad that you emphasize the children like you just did. I think that's an enormously important part of what can bring people together, even those who disagree on everything else. I think one really amazing thing is I've yet to come across a couple who doesn't agree that they both need to be good parents for their children. Right. They might hate the other person to their core, but they still understand and appreciate that parent has an important role to play, continuing to raise the child and continuing to participate in that child's life. Mm-hmm. And I think that's something that we can really get deep into in mediation in a way that really fosters a mutual contribution from both parents when they're coming up with their parenting plan. And it's very, very different from how the adversarial system pits parents against each other. If you litigate your divorce, you're typically, not always, but typically finding yourself in a situation where you're fighting for time. Custody is tied to child support if you're following the guidelines. And because of that incentive to basically fight for parenting time, parents, they air all sorts of dirty laundry in court, and they, instead of finding and emphasizing the things that they appreciate about each other in terms of their strengths as parents, they try to embarrass each other and really drag each other through the mud so they can say, I'm the better parent, I deserve more of the time. And what's unfortunate about that process is, it's just like you say, the children are really left in the exhaust of that nasty, nasty dispute. They're just left in the dust. And at the end of the day, even though this entire battle is about the children in court, the person who's really kind of being, I think, forgotten and abused are the children. Exactly. And mediation, I think, really allows a very structured way to ensure that all of your I's are dotted and your T's are crossed, and you haven't forgotten anything about this very comprehensive parenting plan that encapsulates everything from the exchange schedule to bits of language about how to define and understand the duties of the on-duty parent or the off-duty parent. I mean, it's about getting people on the same page. And what I like to say is it's about dispute-proofing people so that when they're looking forward into the future, we've already reality tested and we've already thought about contingencies. And so people aren't caught off guard, and they have protocols in place and they have agreements in place to handle things that inevitably arise.
Ladies and gentlemen, again, we are listening to licensed attorney and qualified neutral through the Minnesota Supreme Court, Alex Scott Glassmann. Alex, could you just spend a brief moment sharing a little bit about your background and especially your formal education and your experience as it relates to the topic of family law and mediation?
Absolutely. And before I explain my background, let me just stress that this is a super important part of vetting any mediator with whom you're thinking of working. There are, in Minnesota, basic mediation courses of only 30 hours. And technically, you can put yourself out there on the Minnesota Supreme Court Rule 114 roster with only that 30 hours of basic training. So I don't think most people want to be with somebody who only has just that 30 hours. Cool. My my experience, I'm lucky to have kind of caught the mediation bug while I was still in law school. I worked through a mediation clinic, and so my training, thankfully, was very high-level, graduate-level training, much more than the basic 30 hours. And also, in addition to the practical hands-on experience, involved a lot of graduate-level academic on top of the role-playing training and other types of aspects of that preparation work. Since then, I've also done lots of continuing education, some of that through the Conflict Resolution Center, a local mediation nonprofit organization for which I also serve on the board of directors. Also continuing education through the Minnesota State Bar Association's ADR section. I also serve on the council of the ADR section, and I've even taught continuing legal education there. I've also attended several days of workshops through the National Conference of the Academy of Professional Family Mediators. The Academy of Professional Family Mediators is a national organization. Its members tend to be very high quality overall, and that organization has pretty strict criteria for both members who want to join and then for continuing education moving forward. And before I started working here at Erickson Mediation Institute, I trained here as well. So quite a lot, actually. Saying it all out loud, it makes clear.
You've done a lot of work, Alex. You've put the work in. So listen, Alex, when you think about those people who are out there and they are considering divorce, those kind of people who come to you for your help, what final thoughts would you like to leave them with before we close out with our last question for today?
Well, I think the best piece of advice I can give people is this. And this is, I think, very relevant whether you're engaging in a formal mediation process or if you're just kind of dealing with a dispute in your life informally, like the kinds of disputes we have day in, day out. And this is an idea from my mentor and co-founder of Erickson Mediation, Steve Erickson. He often tells people that the only way to guarantee a just and fair result for yourself is to work really hard to get a just and fair result for the other person. And I think the importance there and the way that you can kind of see how it makes practical sense in the real world, if you're litigating, especially, the pie that you're fighting over winds up feeding the lawyers. At the end of a long, drawn-out court battle, the clients are left with crumbs and the lawyers have full bellies, and that's really not an exaggeration. I just attended this past weekend a conference through the Association of Family and Conciliation Courts, and there I saw many judges who were saying this exact same thing, even from their perspective. In other words, it's not just mediators who are very biased and fans of their own industry. Even judges who preside over trials say that, tragically, those who win from divorce trials are the attorneys, not the clients. And so if you don't want that pie to be eaten up by others, in fact, if you want to make the pie bigger, you work hard to get a just and fair result for the other so that you can engender, at least it doesn't have to be a friendship. It doesn't have to be a friendship level type of trust, but if you can engender the type of business type relationship that you need in order to get onto the same page, to establish terms that you both feel comfortable with and can adhere to moving forward, that's real, and you can put that in your pocket and trust that it'll grow into something that I think really stands for integrity, if that makes sense.
It makes 100% sense, Alex, and I'm so glad that you've gone into such detail to explain that. If there is somebody out there who wants to know more about how mediation can work for them, what's the easiest way to connect with you then, Alex?
The best way is to email me, and you can email me at alex@ericksonmediation.com. That's ALEX at ERICKSONMEDIATION.com. And you can also find me on LinkedIn.
Perfect. I'll also make sure that your contact details are on the website beneath your show. Do you have a website as well, Alex? You want to give that out too?
Yes, ericksonmediation.com.
Perfect. Okay, folks, that's all we have time for today. I feel like we're just starting to get warmed up, and I know Alex and I, we could have sat here and spoke for hours and hours on this topic. However, we are out of time. So again, as a reminder, we have been listening to a licensed attorney and qualified neutral through the Minnesota Supreme Court, Alex Scott Glassmann. Thank you so much for sharing so generously with us today, Alex. You have certainly demonstrated without a doubt that you are a true educator and advocate for your clients' success. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Stuart. Thank you for having me.
You are so welcome, Alex, my friend. And I'd also like to take a moment to say a big thank you to you. Yes, our listener. If we didn't have any listeners, we wouldn't have anybody to speak to. So thank you so much for joining us on this, what I can only describe as a very insightful and informative conversation with one of the top mediators in the Minneapolis, Minnesota area today. Again, his name is Alex Scott Glassmann. Make sure you do check him out. Send him an email. He shared his details. Have a look at the website. There are some good resources on there. You know, I'm sure whatever you decide to do, you are most certainly going to be in good hands. So, folks, that's it for today. Again, my name is Stuart Andrew Alexander, and we'll be back shortly with some more leading family law professionals in this, our series of Let's Talk Divorce Conversations. So, until then, take care, have a great day, and we'll talk real soon.
Thank you for tuning in to Impact Makers Radio. To listen to all past, present and future industry thought leaders and trendsetters, visit us at impactmakersradio.com.